The evening felt unfinished, as if something important was supposed to happen but hadn't yet. Emma stood on her front porch, holding a grocery bag in one hand and her phone in the other, rereading a message from her husband that said he would be late again. She didn't feel angry anymore. Anger required energy, and she was tired in a quiet way that had settled into her bones over months. She stepped inside, placed the groceries down, then noticed the garden gate hanging loose, creaking each time the wind passed through it. Daniel had promised to fix it last weekend. That weekend had come and gone like many others. Emma sighed, grabbed a small toolkit from the kitchen drawer, and walked back outside. The sun was sliding down behind the houses, painting the street in warm light. She knelt by the gate and tried to tighten the screws, but the wood was old and the hinge refused to hold. Her fingers slipped, scraping against rust. She pulled her hand back, annoyed more than hurt. "That thing's been fighting you all week," a voice said. Emma looked up, startled. Ryan, her neighbor, stood a few steps away on the sidewalk. He held his car keys and wore a simple smile. Not curious, not just talk. She had seen him often, but never really looked at him. He was always polite, always quiet. "I think it's winning," Emma said, standing up. "Mind if I try?" he asked. She hesitated for a second, then handed him the toolkit. Ryan crouched down and examined the hinge like it mattered. It worked. Quickly, tightening one screw, then adjusting the gate so it lined up better. In less than 5 minutes, the gate stood firm. "There," he said, standing and brushing his hands. "Should hold now." Emma felt something loosen in her chest. "Thank you. I didn't expect." "No problem," he said gently. "That's what neighbors are for." He didn't linger. He waved once and walked back to his house. Emma stood there longer than necessary, staring at the gate. The fix was simple, almost nothing. Yet the moment stayed with her, like a note that kept echoing after the music stopped. Inside, the house felt too quiet. Emma cooked dinner for one and ate at the table alone. She checked her phone, no new messages. She told herself it didn't matter. Still, her mind drifted back to the way Ryan had spoken, direct, kind, no hidden meaning. She hadn't felt that ease in a long time. She went to bed early, but slept lightly, waking once in the middle of the night when Daniel finally came home. He slid into bed without a word, already half asleep. Emma stared at the ceiling, listening to his breathing, wondering when they had stopped talking about small things. The next morning moved fast. Emma rushed through breakfast, showered, and left for work. As she pulled out of the driveway, she saw Ryan watering his plants. He lifted a hand in greeting. She waved back, surprised to feel a small smile form without effort. The days that followed passed quickly. Yet something felt different. Not dramatic, not obvious, just sharper. Emma noticed details again. The sound of birds in the morning. The weight of silence during dinner. Daniel's phone lighting up late at night. She didn't accuse, she didn't ask. She told herself she was imagining things. One afternoon, Emma returned home earlier than usual. As she stepped out of her car, she heard a crash from next door. Ryan was in his garage, struggling to hold a shelf that had come loose. Without thinking, Emma walked over and helped steady it. Their hands didn't touch, but they stood close, focused on the same task. "Looks like we're even now," she said, trying to sound casual. He smiled. "I guess so." They talked for a few minutes. Nothing personal, just work. Whether the rising cost of repairs. Still, Emma felt present in a way she hadn't in months. When she went back inside, the house felt less heavy, though nothing had changed. That evening, Daniel came home on time. He talked about his day, ate dinner, and watched television. Everything looked normal. Emma listened, nodded, and smiled when expected. Yet she felt distant, like she was watching someone else's life through a window. Later, as she washed dishes, she wondered why a stranger's small kindness had stayed with her. More than her husband's efforts that night, the thought made her uncomfortable. She pushed it away. A storm arrived a week later, sudden and strong. The power went out across the neighborhood, plunging the street into darkness. Emma stepped outside with a candle, joining others who had gathered on their porches. Someone laughed. Someone shared news on their phone. It felt old-fashioned and human. Ryan stood nearby, holding 2 cups. "I made tea before the power went," he said. "Would you like one?" Emma accepted, surprised by how warm it felt in her hands. They sat on the steps, listening to the rain hit the pavement. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ryan asked, "Long day?" She nodded. "Long year." He didn't push. He just listened. That was what made it hard. Emma felt her throat tighten and looked away, embarrassed by the sudden rush of feeling. She took a breath and smiled lightly, changing the subject. When the power returned, everyone went back inside. Emma thanked Ryan and closed her door. Her heart beat faster than it should have. She leaned against the wall, confused by her own reaction. Nothing had happened, yet something had. That night, Daniel fell asleep on the couch. His phone buzzed on the table. Emma didn't mean to look. She really didn't. But the screen lit up, showing a name she didn't recognize and a message that read, "I miss our talks." Her hands shook as she picked up the phone. She didn't open the message. She didn't need to. The words were enough. They weren't romantic. They weren't explicit. But they were personal. Too personal. Emma placed the phone back where it was and went to the bedroom. She sat on the bed, staring at her hands, trying to understand how everything had changed without her noticing. She thought of the gate, the tea, the quiet listening. She felt guilt rise in her chest, sharp and confusing. She hadn't crossed any lines. But she had felt close to the edge as rain tapped softly against the window. Emma realized this was no longer just about a broken gate or a kind neighbor. Something in her life was shifting, and she didn't yet know where it would lead. Emma woke up the next morning with a sense of heaviness that she couldn't shake. The rain from last night had soaked the street, leaving puddles that reflected the gray sky. She went about her morning routine mechanically, brushing her teeth, fixing breakfast, checking the mailbox. Everything felt ordinary, yet nothing felt the same. Her mind kept returning to the message on Daniel's phone. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it whispered a truth she hadn't been ready to hear, that someone else had a place in his thoughts that used to belong only to her. She shook her head and tried to push the feeling away. Work would distract her. It always had. By the time she reached her office, Emma's thoughts had settled into a dull ache. She carried like a weight in her chest. Meetings passed in a blur. She answered emails mechanically, her fingers moving automatically over the keyboard. Her eyes blank as they scanned words she barely registered. Her coworkers chatted about trivial things, weekend plans, television shows, gossip, but Emma nodded and smiled without really listening. She felt distant, as though the world was moving around her while she floated inside her own private storm. Later that afternoon, she left the office earlier than usual. A storm had returned, clouds darkening the sky, and the wind rattled the windows. Emma took her time walking home, letting the rain soak her hair and clothes. She liked the rain in a strange, self-destructive way. It felt cleansing, yet heavy at the same time. When she finally reached her house, she noticed Ryan's car in the driveway. He was standing outside, rearranging potted plants that had been knocked over by the wind. He looked up and waved as she approached. "Rough weather," he said. "Yeah." She replied, "It's relentless today." Ryan smiled, and there was a softness in his eyes that Emma couldn't explain. She thanked him silently as she walked past, but she felt an odd warmth that lingered inside her. It wasn't desire, she told herself firmly. Desire was dangerous. This was something else. Recognition, comfort, a reminder of life before routine. And silence had crept in. Inside her house, Daniel was already home. He barely glanced at her as he dropped his briefcase by the door and went straight to the living room. "Dinner's on me," he said absent-mindedly, scrolling through his phone. Emma nodded and went to the kitchen. Cooking felt automatic, stirring, Ingredients, chopping vegetables, following steps she had done countless times. She thought of Ryan again, not in a romantic way, but in a way that reminded her of feeling noticed, of feeling present. She shook her head, annoyed at herself for thinking of him. Days passed in a similar rhythm. Daniel continued to work late, sometimes bringing home takeout he didn't finish, sometimes retreating into television and silence. Emma noticed him less, not out of indifference, but because she had begun to notice herself more. She noticed the ache in her chest whenever his phone buzzed. She noticed the small pangs of loneliness that gnawed at her quietly. She noticed Ryan, always Ryan. His presence was subtle, his wave in the morning, a nod when passing in the hallway. The occasional smile, but it reminded her that attention could be gentle, respectful, and real. One evening, as she walked the dog along the neighborhood path, she saw Ryan outside again, trimming a hedge. "Evening," he said casually. She returned the greeting, and for a moment they walked together. The air was cool, filled with the scent of wet grass. They spoke about small things, the weather, the neighborhood, plans for the weekend. Emma found herself laughing quietly. At something Ryan said, she hadn't laughed like that in months. She noticed how his eyes crinkled when he smiled. She noticed how he listened without waiting for his turn to speak. She felt alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. That night, after Daniel had gone to bed, Emma couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring at the dark street, listening to the faint hum of traffic and the occasional barking of a dog. She thought about Ryan and the strange comfort he brought. She told herself again firmly that it meant nothing. She had a husband. She had a life. But the truth was stubborn and undeniable. She felt more awake in those brief moments with him than she did in months with her husband. The following week, something shifted. A neighborhood blackout left the streets. Dark, and neighbors gathered outside on their porches, sharing candles and flashlights. Emma stepped outside with a small lantern, joining the group. She felt strangely relieved by the casual chatter and laughter. Ryan approached her with 2 steaming cups of tea. "Thought you might like this," he said softly. Emma took the cup, feeling warmth seep into her hands. They sat together quietly, listening to the distant rumble of thunder and the occasional drip of water from the roofs. Emma felt a strange calm she hadn't known she missed. Ryan didn't speak much. He simply listened when she spoke. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. She realized how rare it was to feel truly heard, truly acknowledged without judgment or expectation. When the lights returned, the crowd dispersed. Emma went inside, her heart still heavy but lighter in a different way. She thought about Daniel again. She loved him, she reminded herself, but love had become a word, not a feeling. He had been distant for months, emotionally detached, and she hadn't realized how hollow their connection had become until contrasted with Ryan's quiet presence. Over the next few days, Emma tried to focus on normal life. She went to work, she cooked dinner, she tried to laugh at Daniel's jokes. But she couldn't stop thinking about the subtle warmth of attention, the way someone could make her feel noticed without expecting anything. She felt guilt, yes, but she also felt clarity. Something in her had woken up. One evening, as she was watering her indoor plants, Daniel's phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't look. She knew instinctively what it would say. The uncertainty was worse than the truth. She felt her chest tighten, a quiet pressure building that was not panic, but something more like sorrow. She remembered the tea. In the blackout, the way Ryan had listened, she remembered small gestures that carried immense meaning. And she realized, painfully, that her marriage had become a series of silences, punctuated by messages that belonged elsewhere. Emma tried to talk to Daniel that night. She asked about his day, about his meetings, about the coworkers she had vaguely noticed before. He answered, short and distracted. She didn't press. The conversation ended quickly, leaving her staring at the ceiling, questioning everything. The Following day, she met Ryan briefly at the mailbox. He smiled politely. She returned it, but her mind spun with guilt and longing. She realized she had begun to crave these small interactions, not because she wanted to betray her husband, but because she had forgotten what it felt like to feel seen. She shook her head as she entered her house, scolding herself for thinking about him so much. At work, Emma found herself restless. Her thoughts wandered. She replayed small moments with Ryan, the way he had helped with the gate, the tea during the blackout, the simple smiles that held no expectations. She realized she hadn't felt alive in months. Not really. Her marriage, which had once been full of conversation and laughter, had slipped into a quiet routine. Daniel's absence, emotional and physical, created a space she hadn't known how to fill until Ryan appeared, quietly and innocently. In the edges of her life by midweek, Emma's emotions were a tangled mix of guilt, curiosity, and longing. She wanted nothing inappropriate. She wanted no affairs. But she realized that her heart had started paying attention again, noticing warmth, connection, and presence, things she hadn't realized she was missing. One rainy evening, she stepped outside to hang laundry. Ryan was there, sheltering under his porch, holding an umbrella. Their eyes met. He smiled politely. She smiled back, feeling something she couldn't quite name, a flicker of comfort. A reminder of what it felt like to be acknowledged, to be noticed. Inside, Daniel watched TV silently. Emma stood in the doorway, watching him. She felt a rush of sorrow, a recognition that their relationship had become a quiet drift. She loved him, yes, but she realized she had been lonely even when he was near. That realization was painful, yet freeing. By the end of the week, Emma decided to take a walk alone, letting the rain soak her. She walked past Ryan's house, past familiar streets, letting her thoughts flow. She realized that the past few weeks had changed something inside her, not her loyalty, but her awareness. She had begun to notice small acts of kindness, small gestures of care, and the quiet attention that reminded her she was human, alive, and deserving of presence. That night, as she lay in bed, she understood something profound. Life didn't always come in dramatic moments. Sometimes it came in small gestures, in quiet listening, in shared tea and conversation during a blackout. Those small moments were the ones that reminded her who she was and what she needed. And while her marriage was faltering, she also realized that betrayal wasn't the only lesson. Attention, kindness, and emotional presence could teach her as much, if not more. Emma drifted to sleep with a strange sense of anticipation, not knowing what the next day would bring. She didn't know how Daniel would respond to her growing awareness, or whether her quiet longing would lead anywhere. But she knew one thing: she could no longer ignore the small moments that made her heart feel alive again. Emma woke early the next morning, the sunlight filtering through the thin curtains, painting faint gold lines on the floor. She sat on the edge of the bed, thinking about the past weeks, the quiet moments, the small gestures, and the heavy truths she had begun to understand. The discovery of Daniel's message had been like a shadow falling over her life. But Ryan's presence had become a quiet, lighter reminder that attention, care, and kindness were real, that they could exist without drama or expectation. Emma wasn't confused about what she wanted in life. She wanted honesty, presence, and connection. She wanted someone who saw her, truly saw her, even in small ways. She heard Daniel stir in the next room. He moved silently, the creak of the floorboards familiar. Emma felt a rush of conflicted emotion, love, anger, sorrow, and longing, all rolled into one. She had loved him deeply once, but now she realized that love alone couldn't fix silence or absence. She remembered their conversations, or lack of them, the mechanical exchanges at dinner, the missed phone calls, the quiet evenings when he sat beside her, but was never really there. She sighed, standing up and walking to the kitchen, determined that today she would confront the truth for herself, for their marriage, and for the life she wanted to reclaim. Over breakfast, Emma tried to speak calmly. "Daniel, we need to talk," she said, placing her coffee cup carefully on the table. His eyes met hers, tired, slightly wary. He nodded, setting down his own mug. "Okay," he said softly. Emma took a deep breath, her hand shaking slightly, and began. She told him what she had discovered, how it made her feel, how distant she had felt for months, and how much she had noticed the small, unnoticed things, both the absence of his attention and the quiet gestures of kindness she had experienced elsewhere. Daniel listened quietly, his face unreadable at first. Then he admitted it. Admitted that he had been distant, that he had shared parts of himself with a coworker because he felt unseen and unappreciated. He insisted that it had never been physical, that it was emotional, a mistake born of loneliness. Rather than desire, Emma listened, her chest tight. She didn't feel relief. She didn't feel anger. Not exactly. She felt the weight of months, the ache of quiet moments that had gone on for hours. They spoke. No shouting. No dramatic accusations. Just honestly long, slow, painful honesty. Daniel spoke about his exhaustion, his mistakes, and the loneliness he had never voiced. Emma spoke about her sadness, her frustration, and the emptiness she had felt. They talked about love, about neglect, and about the little things that mattered but had been ignored. By the end of their conversation, the room felt lighter, though not free of tension. They had opened wounds, and opening wounds was never painless. But it had to be done in the days that followed. Emma tried to focus on herself. She spent mornings walking in the neighborhood, noticing the sunlight on the trees, the laughter of children playing, and the simple movements of life that she had been too distracted to observe. She greeted neighbors politely, acknowledging their presence in ways she had overlooked for years. Ryan was still there, still kind, but respectful of boundaries. He greeted her with a simple nod or smile when they passed in the street, and she found that she appreciated his presence without needing anything from him. It was a strange comfort to exist alongside someone who could offer kindness without expectation, who could listen without judgment. Emma began attending counseling sessions with Daniel. They spoke to a professional about trust, communication, and rebuilding the intimacy they had lost. The sessions were difficult. Tears came easily. Words that had been unspoken for years were forced out into the open. Each conversation revealed cracks and spaces that had grown quietly over time. Emma found herself listening differently, noticing subtle changes in Daniel's expressions, the softness in his tone when he apologized, the way he leaned in slightly when he wanted to connect. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began to recognize the man she had married. Not a perfect man, not someone without flaws, but a person willing to face the truth and try. Outside the home, life continued. Emma still encountered Ryan occasionally watering plants, taking out the trash, walking along the street, but their interactions were brief and polite. No lingering conversations, no hidden meanings, just acknowledgement of each other's presence. Emma found she no longer craved those moments the way she had at first. Instead, she noticed them as reminders, gentle markers of what it felt like to be seen. She realized that what Ryan had offered her wasn't a path to betrayal, but a mirror. His small acts had shown her what she had been missing: attention, care, respect, and emotional presence. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Emma returned home to find Daniel waiting in the living room. He had made tea, placed 2 cups on the table, and sat with a tentative smile. It was a simple act, but Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest. She realized that kindness, when offered deliberately and with thought, could rebuild what had been broken. She poured herself a cup and sat across from him, noticing the care in his movements, the effort in his words. They spoke softly about their day, about trivial things, and about feelings. Nothing dramatic, nothing perfect, but everything real. The weeks turned into months. Emma and Daniel learned to navigate a new rhythm in their marriage. Trust had been shaken, yes, but it had also been tested and rebuilt in small increments. Emma discovered patience she hadn't known she possessed, and Daniel discovered vulnerability he had long avoided. Together, they learned that love was not static. It required attention, honesty, and effort every day. Emma continued to notice the quiet aspects of life. She noticed the warmth of sunlight on the kitchen counter, the scent of rain on asphalt, the small smiles of neighbors passing by. Ryan remained part of her world, but only as a neighbor, someone whose kindness had reminded her of what mattered but had never crossed boundaries. She felt gratitude for him, quiet appreciation for the way small gestures could illuminate the heart. One night, after a long day of work and counseling, Emma sat alone on the porch. The street was quiet, the moon bright above, casting silver light over the rooftops. She reflected on the past months, the emotional distance, the heartbreak, the small kindnesses, the slow rebuilding of trust. She thought about the lessons she had learned, that attention and presence mattered more than perfection, that silence could hurt as deeply as betrayal, and that kindness, even in small doses, could illuminate paths forward. Daniel joined her, eventually offering a blanket and a soft smile. They sat together, shoulders touching, listening to the subtle sounds of the night. No words were needed at first. The silence was comfortable, full of shared understanding. Then Daniel spoke, quietly. "Thank you for staying, for trying, for not giving up." Emma looked at him, her eyes reflecting moonlight and a quiet strength. "Thank you for being honest," she replied, "for facing what needed to be faced." Tension that had lingered for months eased slightly. They were not perfect, nor had they returned to the carefree days of their early marriage. But they had begun a new chapter built on honesty, awareness, and deliberate care. Emma realized that love was not about grand gestures or dramatic moments. Love was about small acts, consistency, and emotional presence. It was about noticing the people you cared about, even when life felt heavy. As the night deepened, Emma reflected on Ryan's role in her journey. She realized he had never been a temptation, never been a threat to her marriage. He had been a mirror, showing her what had been absent. His kindness had reminded her of her own worth and of the simple truths she had overlooked. She felt gratitude without guilt, recognition without longing. That clarity was liberating. Over time, Emma and Daniel built routines that included small daily acts of connection, sharing a morning coffee, walking together after dinner, exchanging genuine smiles and conversation. They laughed again, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes easily. They argued at times, but the arguments were less about neglect and more about honest expression of feelings. They had learned to communicate, to notice, to be present for each other. Emma also discovered an inner strength she hadn't fully known. She realized that she could feel deeply, carefully, and still maintain boundaries. She could acknowledge the kindness of others without being swept away. She could notice what she had been missing without seeking it elsewhere. This self-awareness gave her confidence, peace, and a sense of emotional maturity. Months later, Emma stood on her porch, watching the sunset. She thought about the journey she had traveled, the heartbreak, the uncertainty, the quiet moments of comfort from a neighbor, and the slow, deliberate rebuilding of her marriage. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, a gentle pride in the way she had navigated difficult emotions without losing herself. Daniel joined her, holding her hand. They didn't need words. The shared presence, the gentle touch, the mutual understanding, it was enough. The past could not be erased, but it had been acknowledged, learned from, and used to strengthen the bond between them. As night fell, Emma reflected once more on kindness, presence, and the small gestures that shaped hearts. She realized that love was not only about passion or excitement, it was about attention, effort, honesty, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. It was about noticing, listening, caring, and showing up every day.